Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Sweet Tooth Episode 7. So, this episode is to really just be carried on to the fact of like, hey guys, you know the guy that you've been watching for the last 6 episodes? Well, now we gotta finally get to his origin story. Because if anything, like, this guy just showed up, growed up, and now you are now wondering, like, okay, like, when are we gonna get to how exactly this person came to be within that forest with Pubba? Like, how did he get to that point? And now with this episode, we are to focus on that. We are to have uh, the origin of Birdie and Pubba slash Richard. We are to find out that it seems that Birdie was a chemist and Richard was just a janitor that had worked at uh, at Birdie's facility, and that's how they just connected with one another. Coincidentally, I guess this place is a fairly small town. Everybody starts to bump into one another, and eventually it takes both Birdie and Richard kind of connecting at this bar to eventually have them start to talk to one another, and that leads to eventually Birdie finding out information about her experiment that is going on beyond her being told that she is going to be transferred elsewhere. Uh, we eventually find out that Birdie's experiment is causing a lot of problems to where the military is to swoop in and take every little bit of research that Birdie is to have and and basically ransack the environment of which that Birdie is in, to where we have Birdie who eventually has to eventually tell Richard what she is working on, and to eventually have Richard uh, go on to eventually have to go in seclusion because of this information. And eventually Gus will work his way into that. But going into this episode, I thought it was interesting how, like, especially in this one, like, there is just this, like, hey, we're going to focus on Gus now. You guys, we're going to focus on Gus. And then eventually, I think maybe the last episode, we might either have to get back to the Amy stuff to see where that is eventually going to get connected uh, to probably Gus. I'm assuming it has to be, right? Like, everybody's probably assessing or assuming, right? Because they have to go back with that Amy story. Like, everything has to come full circle and be connected with everything. I don't know why, but I just feel like it has to. Uh, Plus, I also think that eventually, I don't think Birdie will probably be in this season. Or if we are going to get Birdie, it's going to be at like the last ditch second if we do. To just kind of like show, hey, Birdie is still alive because chemist, but really, like, I think it's going to be one of those kind of like one person is going to be on one side of the fence and Gus is going to be on the other and like, no, and then it won't work out or something. Like, it'll be like a driving force to want people like who just can't wait for the second season. But I don't know. A lot of speculation, a lot of guessing. There's a lot of stuff to unpack in the very last episode, so any number of things could be a possibility. But with that said, I think I've yammered on quite a bit enough. There isn't a lot. There isn't like a lot for me to talk about this in a very cryptic like sense. We find Birdie is a chemist, and we found Pubba actually has a real name named Richard. And so we are to find these two who coincidentally work in the same chemistry lab. The only thing is, Richard is just a janitor, and Birdie is a chemist. So both of them are to conveniently see one another eye to eye while Birdie is working on something. And eventually, both Birdie and Richard coincidentally meet yet again in a bar. So, really, I'm just going to kind of conveniently, like, holder it all right there to just be like, one, you can't really cement that. You can't really cement that Richard and Birdie really like fell in love in this episode. I think it was just a convenience like thing. I think it was really that they were close to it, but I think also like Birdie had to make a lot of quick consensuses and just kind of said like, well, like he's a nice guy, right? like you know what, like he could be like a creep, but he also could be a nice guy. So really, I think that is where I want to kind of end off for this cryptic-like version. I think it's time to get into spoilers, and I'm probably going to have to put a lot of pins in a lot of places for these spots because it's kind of impossible to go and tell one side of one story and then go back and tell the other on this one. Like, if anything, one story will kind of spoil the other, and so really I have to much more like do this in a, oh, I'm going to tell a portion of this story, stop, tell a portion, so I'll probably have to tell it like somewhere close to how the episode does. But again, I might not go into heavily detail about everything, and I think I've mentioned that through a lot of other reviews. But let's get into the coveted double 5-time territory, because I've spoken long enough about cryptic things. So, spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time we get to spoil this episode. So, we are to have Gus, Tommy, I think they call him Jep. But I'm just like, no, I've called him Tommy through 6 episodes, now counting 7. I'm not going to stop now. It's not going to happen. So, we have Tommy, Bear, and Gus. Are we going to call Bear Mandy now? Because that's her actual, like, her legitimate name. So, we have these 3 who are all to make it to Gus's home. And so Gus is banging on the door, hoping somebody's home. And really, we get to a point to where before Gus makes it to the door, Tommy and Bear stop him to just say, you know what? Like, don't get your hopes up. Like, don't naturally assume that your mother is going to be behind that door. And so we have Gus rush to the door anyways, banging on the door, asking if anyone's home, and someone coincidentally is. And so we have this person who is nice enough to open this door because Tommy is telling her, like, hey, we're not here to hurt you. Like, we're just here for a gal named Birdie kind of thing. And so we have this person who is to open this door, and it is a woman named Judy. Evidently, what had happened to Judy is that Judy had been beaten up by some people during this whole like apocalypse thing. Birdie was to take Judy to her home and take care of her, and that's why we are to see Judy the way she is and how she's just kind of like very kind of like hurt and kind of hard to like move around and all that jazz. So, because we have this woman who goes to the door and Gus assumes that it is Birdie, and we have Judy who is like, no, like I'm not Birdie, I'm Judy. Like, if anything, like you must actually be Gus. And wouldn't you know it, like, you're all grown up, you're all safe. Evidently, Birdie went out to go and try to find Gus, and I guess now that is just going to be a fruitful endeavor for her, to where she has to turn all the way back around and try to find a way back home. Because how is Birdie going to be able to find Gus? Like, did she know exactly where Gus is going to be? Like, did Richard, before he left with Gus, just say, "Hey, yeah, we're gonna go and be at the national park. Like, hopefully you'll find us there. It's a big, gigantic area, but you'll be able to easily find me because I'm gonna be at this cabin. Hopefully you'll figure that out." So we have Gus, who goes into this home to see a number of different pictures of her mother, and eventually she is to also find or eventually Gus is also to find a picture of her mother and some old man. And so we have Gus trying to figure out who this old man is, and Tommy and Bear make the consensus is like, well, maybe it's your grandfather. And so Gus is like, I have a grandfather? It's like, that could actually just be any number of random old man, and that could not actually possibly be Birdie's father. But hey, if Gus wants to keep connecting the dots to say that he has a family, then by golly, let him. So we so we are to eventually have Gus, who is to go through Birdie's attic, and eventually find some other old pictures, some other information that Birdie has had. And so now we are to put a pin in that. So let's go into the origins of Richard and Birdie. So we have Richard, who is just doing his janitorial duties, kind of being a little bit nosy, but really it's not a big deal. We have a certain kind of music playing at the time that Richard is to do his job, I guess, to signify something. But we are to have Gus, who is just kind of doing his job, just mopping away. And we have eventually Birdie, who is talking to one of her co-scientists to find out that I guess she is being transferred elsewhere. And so we have Birdie, who is getting this sad information, and Richard is looking on and just like, huh? Like, what is she being told? Because Richard does not understand at all what exactly they're doing in this facility. They just understand that he just understands like that they are doing something with chickens, but he doesn't understand what. Like chicken or chicken eggs, but he doesn't understand exactly what they're doing, because we eventually have Birdie, who is to eventually explain to him what they're doing when eventually they are to go into the bar situation. So we have this shot in the very beginning of this show of people in Alaska drilling in the ice. Eventually, there is this big, huge piece of ice that is to be pulled out of Alaska to have a man go and take a microscope to it. Evidently, these people are looking for these microorganisms that exist in the ice to, I guess, try and create vaccines that are to either help or hurt the world. It's kind of a coin flip of what exactly this thing is going to do. And so we have Birdie, who is talking to Richard, and it seems that at first that Richard kind of comes off as a creep to Birdie, but Birdie is like, well, since I'm getting transferred anyways, let me just go ahead and just talk to this Richard guy and just explain things because he seems nice enough. Because it seems like Richard is to actually show concern for Birdie, and so since Birdie doesn't have another man to her name, I guess Birdie is just like, you know what? Like, this Richard guy, he seems kind and nice enough. Like, I'm just gonna spill all the beans, especially once we get more and more drunk. We see them just take shot after shot after shot, and then so Birdie, drunk as a skunk, goes with Richard to this booth and starts explaining what they are actually doing in this laboratory. So these people are to get these microorganisms from this ice and go and take out the microorganisms and inject them into chicken eggs to eventually try and make vaccines, to eventually try and do all kinds of like experiments with these vaccines, test things, do theories, so on and so forth. Because there's a reason why I'm holding off at this point of what I'm saying. So there's a continuation to where I was going with, but I have to put a pen in that. So after Richard is to hear the explanation of what Birdie is working on, we eventually have Richard and Birdie realize that they are more than drunk enough. And so we have Birdie, who is going to walk home because it seems that her home isn't very far from this bar. And so Richard is like, well, hey, like, how about I walk you home? Like, how would I make sure you get home and you're okay? And so we have Birdie that it's like, God, this guy is really winning some brownie points with me. And so we have them both walk home. And so we have them both be in this house. And so we get where Birdie is going to make Mark some hot cocoa. And so we now can figure out where that hot cocoa origin thing comes from when Gus has a dream sequence. Some people could say that that was a hallucination where Gus was to be sleeping. I could say that he probably just got knocked out, and really that like real hard bump on the head kind of knocked him out to just go and dream away whatever horrors he was to have. Because it seems that every single time he is to have a dream sequence, he is to have some kind of horrors become of it. So we have Richard drinking the hot chocolate, and he's like, you know what, that's the best hot chocolate I've ever had. Like, you would have thought Richard would have like scribbled the like hey, can you tell me that recipe? Like, could you let me know how it is? Because I want to assume or assess that eventually Birdie, during some point of Gus being a baby, Birdie went to Richard to spend some time with him, and then eventually had to leave for whatever reason. But we could hope. So, we are to have eventually Birdie start to kind of wipe some chocolate off of Richard's face. And eventually, we have Birdie that also mentions, is like, well, hey, you can get closer to me. Because, like, he's on one side of the couch, she's on another. And so we almost had them start to kiss. And then the phone rings. I'm like, oh, of course it does. So we have Birdie, who is to get a call from Fort Smith, which is uh, the the science lab that she was, of course, hired in, and of course, Richard the same. And so she is to find out that her equipment and her everything is being seized by the military. The military is coming in and seizing every bit of uh, of Birdie's. It's kind of like in Thor 1, where Coulson just comes in and takes every single thing of Natalie Portman's character and Eric Selvig, and like they just go in and just take everything because they have some information that no prying eyes should see. And so the military comes in and starts swiping all of Birdie's information. So Birdie has to scramble to get back to the facility. And luckily, Richard still has his janitor keys, so he can get into the facility quite easily. So we have Richard and we have Birdie making their way to the facility. And so we have them go in. And so Birdie is to finally tell Richard the absolute truth about what she is doing. Now put a pin in that. So Gus is to go on to eventually start looking through paperwork, through research, and through kind of some scribblings or paperwork that Birdie had done. To where eventually we are to see Gus start to find pictures of himself as a baby. The thing with these pictures is that this baby has a lot of medical attachments to it. And so we are to find the meaning of Gus. Gus is actually called Genetic Unit Series. That's where Gus gets his name from. We end up finding out that Gus had been engineered into being this hybrid. We find out that he is a test tube baby, basically, to be a hybrid. And I am wondering, here's the thing. I'm wondering if Birdie, since she was a part of this experiment, put her eggs up to eventually create this hybrid. So I'm wondering if she technically still was the person who is Gus's biological parent, but Richard just can't be. Of course, because like Richard wasn't there. He didn't give any anything from to this facility to garner him having a biological connection with Gus. But I'm assuming that Birdie probably did. I'm assuming. I'm assessing. I'm hoping, because good God, like if Gus is just a 100% test tube baby, man, would that suck. But I'm hoping that eventually Birdie gave birth to this hybrid. I hope. Here is one thing. Also, we are to find out when Birdie is talking to Richard. Richard is to ask if she is to have a boyfriend, a husband, or an anything. And Birdie is to mention that she had a husband that died, and so Birdie had become a widow. I'm wondering if the test tube baby of Gus could have honestly been things of Birdie and her previous husband. So maybe that is why like you can still know, or you can still like have a biological, like you can have a real true, like this could be the last thing of Birdie's previous husband, and that's why Birdie eventually went out to try to find Gus, because Gus is actually really important to her, because it's the last thing of her husband. Man, would that be just a story if that were true? Because I would just be like, you know what, I buy that. Like, I can buy that. Like, I'll take that to the bank. So we are to push on, and so Gus is to find out that he is just a test tube baby, and man is he upset, because he's like, oh my god, so my mother isn't really my mother? My, like, everything has now changed, like, I'm just this product of some science experiment? Like, we have so many people that would tend to find out this and just be outraged. Like, we are to have, like, Judge Dredd, the Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd, find out that he was just a test tube baby. Like, he was made uh, in some factory or whichever to create the perfect judge, uh, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of times where we find out that a lot of people were taken from their biological homes and born and bred to be a hitman, like in the video game movie Hitman, where a bunch of random kids were just taken to be turned into assassins and or killers. We have Gus, who was ripped away from all that, and what kind of hybrid Gus could have been if uh, if Gus would have stayed with Birdie. Because what is to happen is Gus is to find out this information. Bear is trying to convince Gus that it's like, hey, like I was adopted, and so if anything, like the parents that I had weren't my biological parents, but they still loved me. And Gus is like, dude, I don't even understand what that means. You're using too many big words. And so Tommy has to customize it and put it into layman's terms for Gus to understand. But that doesn't mean that Gus is not still upset and heartbroken that um, that his parents weren't his real true biological mother and father, but still they loved him. They did. So we have Birdie, who is to show Richard uh, the container where Gus is in, and to show him off to Richard. And so Birdie is realizing that someone is coming for her things. And so Birdie is taking Gus, holding it into her arms. And Birdie is making this consensus that, like, yeah, like, Richard seems like a nice guy. He seems like a person that will work well with a child. And so Birdie has to forcibly give it to Richard. And Richard's like, dude, I don't know anything about babies. And so Birdie's like, well, you'll learn. Like, you'll figure it out because you have to. And like think of the child. Like think of uh like try to be a like just try to do your best. And so we have Richard receiving the handoff of Gus, just going, should I give him milk? Should I give him hay? Should I give him grass? What should I give him? So we have Gus, who is to go out in the forest and pack up everything he owns into this car, and have just Gus just be wearing a hat just to kind of like hide the fact that he's a hybrid. And so we have Gus getting all of his stuff from out of this car and eventually making his way to the national park where the origin is where the very first episode of this is to start off. And so really that is a bulk of which that happens within this episode. And so hopefully there are some things here and there that I got into, but maybe not everything. Really, a lot of times I just go back and kind of really re-trigger and re-pull and just be like, oh yeah, I forgot about this, or yeah, I didn't mention that, or like there's some times where really a lot of people would just be like, yeah, this is a real skin and bones review, but also like a lot of people, more than anything, tend to hook themselves on to, well, yeah, I wanted this review a lot shorter. It's like, well, then that's when like I tend to just like, okay, well, bare bones and then get out. But I really enjoy this episode, even though it does have a very heartbreaking moment where we are to find Gus, who is to realize that his parents aren't his real, true biological parents. But there's something about where like I'm assuming like, well, is Gus just going to get rid of Dog again, burn it up, and leave it behind? Because really, he finally realizes that his father isn't really truly his dad, uh, or any number of things. What is this last episode going to go into? Well, I guess we're gonna have to figure out for ourselves when eventually we watch it, review it, and call it a day. So that's all I want to say. Goodbye. I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.